to that. So let's move on to the last bit, which is the positive bit. Okay. And that is turning challenges into opportunities. So the first one, again, I think probably for Patrick first. What are the short and mid-term impacts of COVID for the economy and businesses?
Right. I mean, if you look at all the recent publications, a lot has been said about the changes in working habits. People are working from home. Just for an example, even within my firm itself, we have tried working from home way before this situation, but now it sort of forces us to do so. And it sort of creates an environment whereby, hey, actually we realize it can be done. So this has implications on real estate, how you rent the building, how you even lay out your office itself, right? So changes to working habits, changes to how people consume, right, the services will be very dramatic, right? And it depends on whether this trend will continue post the COVID. So hence, and this whole COVID situation actually brought to the fore of the importance of adopting technology, right? So if you speak to a lot of the startups, in fact, they're pretty excited because this really presents opportunities when in the past they got to encourage, right, their clients to take them on. But now the value proposition is there. Then the key is how do they create the value and demonstrate the value, right, to their targeted customers.
So let's go into another big topic, which is what are the big opportunities that exist post-COVID? Let's talk about different industries. So for instance, for the fintech industry, what would be the big opportunities?
I'm probably looking at two areas. I want to put them into the non-consumer facing category, and probably the other category will be consumer facing. For non-consumer facing, I think everyone's eager to see a COVID-19 vaccine. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing any startup that's helping to accelerate therapeutic development or shortening the clinical trials process while still maintaining safety, while still maintaining regulatory, keeping the regulatory guidelines or approval checkpoints in place, but anything that can push that therapeutic development mechanism a lot faster in itself. Could AI do that? Could better lab on a chip technology do that? So on and so forth. Maybe for consumer facing type technology, I'm looking. I think a lot of people are working from home. Some of us are adapting well. Some of us are probably surviving barely. So I guess I think mental health still continues to could be an exciting part for everyone to keep track, to maintain mindfulness, but also at the same time for families, for example, some governments or some authorities are a bit more lenient in allowing people to exercise in the parks in itself, but I think fitness tech could be something that could continue to benefit. Like, for example, I think just now as Patrick was mentioning about the new modes of work. For example, if everybody is getting used to work from home, I think that's going to affect co-working spaces. That could affect gyms. How gyms are going to operate in itself, because anyone who can build that community virtually and maintain that traction in itself could still benefit post-COVID in itself. Yeah. Then there's also education technology. How do you for children who are still learning from home, how can you make the best out of it in a sense? And could gamification be up to the next level such that kids are still mentally attracted to what they're learning, and gain some benefit from that in itself? For the parents, kids, trying to keep them occupied in itself.
Yeah, I agree with all that. In fact, when I looked at that question, there were 6 things that I came up with in my own head. The first, is really around how do we make home working much more easy. I see the survey, 8 out of 10 Singaporeans actually want to continue working from home post this. I'm surprised, but apparently that's what the Straits Times survey seems to suggest. Maybe not 100%, because I'm sure most people are getting a bit stir crazy. But even one of my companies, which actually does corporate governance mainly for MNCs, we now have a program which is to assess which of your workers can best work from home, which ones don't. And in fact, sorry, Patrick, but it's Deloitte actually running with us. sending to their investee companies.
Mm-hmm.
The other two areas you didn't mention, though, Alvin, were, and I think for me, of course, this is my space, is anything to do with pandemic preparedness. I think, well, because there will be another pandemic in the next few years. Mm-hmm. You know, so when we get the vaccines, it may be like SARS and MERS and Zika. You know, by the time the vaccine comes out, everything's all dying down. Mm. You know, so if you take the Jenner Institute's vaccine, they're probably the only people in the world who are hoping that the epidemic continues as long as possible, so they can actually test their vaccine. Because, you know, it's actually based on a MERS vaccine they developed, and by the time they developed the MERS vaccine, you know, there was hardly any cases.
That's true, yeah.
The other thing is infection control. Anything to do that actually keeps infections down in the community, I think, will be something that people will, at least in the short to medium term, will buy. So I think that's the other area. Last question then is, does anyone want to share some war stories?
Probably just share one, which we are still currently working with them. So this startup is in a supply chain, right, where a sudden drop and a sudden change in the environment, it simply meant that a lot of potential sign-ups don't want to sign up anymore, right? Because once you sign up, it's easily for a year or more, and there's implementation costs as well. And they also in the second and I would say second and a half round of fundraising, right, for the next round. So this is coming on the back of COVID, right? So it's a double whammy for them. Number one, the revenue is dropping, right? Number two, cash flow is an issue, right? Because we do not know how long the situation will last. So, but fundraising is challenging. The investors are very interested, right? But again, you know, but they are waiting to see. Yeah. So some of the things that we are helping them and how I advise them, it's really, number one, change your model a little bit. Instead of a yearly subscription, why don't you reach out and say, let's do it on a pay-per-use basis? And from an implementation perspective, are you able to shorten it? Don't give a Rolls-Royce kind of a standard kind of implementation, but do it on a piecemeal, because a lot of times the economic activity has dropped significantly. So you do not need the whole suite of functions, right? So why don't you do it on a piecemeal and on a smaller scale? And obviously identify new targets, put in your pitch deck, put in your business plan, demonstrate to your investors that actually in such a situation, I'm looking beyond 12 months, beyond 18 months, right? So it demonstrates a foresight from on the end of the founders, and investors typically will like that.
Okay. So I think we've ended our hour. I just want to end on a positive note. The first is that, you know, we've obviously been through the financial crisis before, you know, and we went through the 2008 financial crisis. 4 out of 10 SMEs actually lost sales. 5 out of 10 actually had to lay off staff. But within a year, there were signs of recovery. It may have taken, you know, 9 years to full recovery, but within a year, recovery started. The other point of note is that you have to remember that 55% of all Fortune 500 companies in the US were created during a recession. And nearly $150 billion worth of tech companies were created as a result of the last financial recession, including Airbnb. And Airbnb was only started because these guys couldn't pay their rent. So I think that sort of, I think, like you to go with a positive note, this really is an opportunity time, if you can think broadly, to make this an opportunity rather than a disaster. Okay, I think our time is up.